Tonight we're slipping back almost 1,000 years, into the cold stone cradle of medieval Germany, where a baby named Hildegard opens her eyes, not just to the world, but to something stranger. You're not even walking yet, but light is pouring into your mind like stained glass melting into your thoughts. Shapes, colors, sounds without source. Your nursemaid assumes you're reacting to the weather. But you know better. Something's already talking to you, though no one else can hear it. And you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love knowing who's drifting off where. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins in 1098, in the Rhineland town of Bermersheim, with your birth as the 10th child of a minor noble family. And by minor we mean just rich enough to have land, but not rich enough to give all their kids an inheritance. That's how you end up tithed to the church, literally. You're a kind of living offering. It's what they did with extra daughters. Here, God, take this one. But you're not exactly average from the start. Your earliest memories are already streaked with brightness, visions, not dreams. As a toddler, you tell your nursemaid you see a light so bright my soul trembles. That's not usually on the toddler vocabulary list. But you're lucky she doesn't accuse you of witchcraft. She just gives you a blank look and asks if you're hungry. You grow up trying to understand it. You're smart, but not allowed to go to school like the boys. Instead, you wander through gardens and kitchens, silently memorizing the names of herbs, listening to bees hum like tiny monks. You hear the wind move through trees like whispered chants. It's as if the whole world is part of a liturgy you're just beginning to comprehend. And the visions? They keep coming. Sometimes they crash in like lightning behind your eyelids. Sometimes they whisper, too loud to ignore. You don't dare tell too many people. This is an age where saying I hear voices doesn't land you in therapy, it lands you under suspicion. Historians still argue whether your early visions were symptoms of migraine aura, epilepsy, or spiritual ecstasy. Frankly, none of those scholars have had to deal with holy fire waking them up at 3 a.m. So who are they to judge? Here's a quirky detail. Later in life, you'll describe these visions as coming with a luminous clarity, but get this, no sound. You don't hear the voice of God, you see it, like a visual download burned onto your retinas. No angel choir singing just yet, just pure, visual overload. Imagine trying to explain that to a monk whose biggest vision involves maybe spotting a double rainbow. By the time you're about 5, the world already feels off balance. You understand things people don't talk about, feel patterns in the earth, hear the sadness in wood as it's carved into pews. The adults around you think you're dreamy or sickly. You're often bedridden. Not because you're weak, because your brain and spirit are on constant overload. You haven't even left your town yet, but your inner universe is already bursting at the seams. Fast forward to age 8, and your parents, eager to secure a little eternal credit with the Almighty, hand you off to a local religious figure named Jutta von Sponheim. This is where things really start to twist. You don't just go to a convent. You get bricked into one. The term is anchoress. It's not just a nun. It's a human offering sealed into a tiny cell beside a monastery, forever. Think of it like a spiritual quarantine with 0 exits and extremely low lighting. Except in your case, you're still a kid. That's right, you, tiny Hildegard, are locked inside a chamber behind a church wall with Jutta, her copy of the Psalms, a chunk of hard bread, and what you'll eventually describe as an overwhelming sense of divine presence. Most kids get a puppy. You get a cloister cell and a lifetime supply of spiritual intensity. Jutta, to her credit, isn't cruel. She's young, noble, and famously intense. Picture a woman with a hair shirt, a fasting schedule, and a devotion so fiery it makes other nuns uncomfortable. She becomes your mentor, your model, and your mystery. She barely speaks, but teaches you everything she can: Latin prayers, sacred music, herbal lore. And silently, as you watch her prostrate in prayer day after day, you wonder if she sees the light, too. Historians are still debating whether Yuta ever experienced visions of her own. Some claim she did, but just didn't write them down. Others say she was simply drawn to the mystery of your condition, nurturing it in her own cryptic way. As you lie awake in your cell, less than the size of a pantry, you try to make sense of it all. You're too young to fully understand, but something in you already senses that this isolation, this strange noise of silence, is shaping you into something otherworldly. You can feel it pressing behind your eyes. And the light? Oh, it's still there. Louder than ever. You're still a child, and already you live inside a wall. Literally. Your tiny anchorage cell, attached to the Benedictine monastery at Disibodenberg, isn't even yours alone. You share it with Yuta, who's both your guardian and your spiritual GPS, and one or two other girls brought in later. But you're the youngest, the most withdrawn, and the one with the strange inner glow. The monks seal the entrance behind you with a small ceremonial service. It's not a burial, but it kind of feels like one. You're alive, yes, but this is a kind of living death. No fresh air, no visitors, no walks in the fields. A window to the chapel lets you hear the mass, and another slit in the stone allows food to be passed through, mostly coarse bread, a little cheese, and sometimes, on feast days, a blessed bit of dried fruit. On really special occasions, maybe fish. A medieval tasting menu for a girl who sees God. Time passes differently inside. You count days by the rhythm of the monastic bells. Prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline, it becomes your heartbeat. You're copying Latin prayers on wax tablets by candlelight, your fingers cramping in the cold. Your breath fogs the air in winter. There's no fireplace. No fireplace, and no exit. Yet the visions persist. Sometimes the light comes when you're kneeling. Sometimes when you're half asleep. Sometimes mid-bite into your meager cheese. You don't invite it, it simply arrives. Like a cosmic PowerPoint show beamed directly into your brain. Golden rivers, burning cities, spinning stars. At one point, you even see a man with the head of a lion and feet like fire. And unlike dreams, these don't fade when you wake. They linger. You tell Yuta a little. Just fragments. Her response. She nods, then tightens her fast and weeps in her prayers. It's unclear whether she's disturbed or moved. Possibly both. Years pass this way. Your skin grows pale from lack of sun. Your hair thins, and your joints stiffen. But your mind expands in terrifying ways. The visions are becoming more structured now. Not just imagery, but messages. You begin understanding the symbols, a kind of sacred architecture of meaning. You memorize them, because you have no parchment. Not yet. Just your own mind as a vault. Here's something you'd probably never guess. Even in this claustrophobic setting, word spreads. The monks grow curious about the child sealed with Yuta. Some say you're a prodigy. Others whisper madness. A few suspect witchcraft. Nobody says any of this to your face, of course. But you can feel the weight of their silence on the other side of the wall. One fringe account says Yuta wrote secret letters to church figures about you, describing your brightness, your uncommon gifts. Those letters are lost to time, or perhaps never existed. Historians still argue whether you were a willing student or a reluctant captive. Maybe a bit of both. Then, at age 14, a major event shifts your strange, cloistered universe. You begin to bleed. Your first menstruation. Which, in your context, is both totally normal and completely mystical. In medieval theology, the female body was considered both sacred and suspicious. You're told to fast harder, pray deeper, and offer your earthly change to God. There are no pamphlets, no soothing tea, just whispers and wide-eyed stares. And yet, you feel it differently. To you, this bodily threshold feels like a key turning. The visions become louder, brighter, more urgent. You feel God's voice pressing against your bones. Still, you remain silent to the outside world. You write nothing. You tell no one but Yuta, and even then, only vague outlines. You're terrified. Terrified of being labeled a heretic. Terrified of being sent away. Or worse, silenced. So instead, you wait. You kneel. You chant. You study. You learn the Psalms so thoroughly that they echo in your sleep. You develop a secret language of metaphors to explain your visions to yourself. And you grow strangely fond of your surroundings. The bare stones. The sliver of sky visible through your only window. The scratchy woolen robe that now feels like a second skin. This becomes your world. Not chosen, but shaped around you like a shell. And still, the visions don't stop. They evolve. You start seeing elaborate wheels spinning through the heavens. Choirs of angels in mathematical arrangements. Creatures with 6 wings, eyes on every feather. At one point, a golden mountain splits open and a river of flame pours through a city of mirrors. Honestly, if a modern kid said this out loud in class, they'd be sent to the school counselor real fast. But here, you're hidden. And maybe that's your strange blessing. Here's a quirky twist. According to one early biography, you once received a vision that included a taste. That's right. A flavor. You described it as the sweetness of eternal truth, like honey on the tongue. Medieval synesthesia, basically. You're seeing light, hearing silence, and now tasting divine honey. Is this sainthood? Or a sensory meltdown? The monks don't know. But they start to notice something. You're not just surviving in the anchor hold. You're growing powerful in ways they can't quite name. You can quote scripture like a bishop. You can calm people with your presence. You can sense illness before it's visible. It's subtle, but real. You're only 16, and already people are asking you to questions through the wall. Medical advice. Prayers. Warnings. And when you give those answers, quietly, discreetly, they work. Even if no one can explain why. You've been behind these walls for nearly a decade, and by now the monastery has learned to live with your mystery. You're the pale, cloistered girl with the strange calm, the memorized psalms, and eyes that seem to glow after prayer. You rarely speak, but when you do, your voice carries a weight that turns heads even from behind stone. But inside, the visions are getting too loud to bear. It starts with pressure. Not pain, more like your skull is filled with thunderclouds. You close your eyes and see colors so bright they make your heart race. Shapes moving. Not random, organized. You see towers built of stars. Blood-red rivers flowing backward. Great wheels of fire spinning through space, each spoke etched with words you somehow understand, though they're in no human language. And then, there are the faces. Not faces you know, faces made of flame. They speak, but the sound is like a silent roar. You can't explain this to anyone. You don't even fully understand it yourself. All you know is that it happens, again and again. You pray harder. Fast longer. Chant deeper. But the visions won't go away. They're not whispers anymore. They're commands. One night, you see a blinding light rip through a church in your mind. Not your monastery, but some grand cathedral, its columns melting into vines and gold. A voice, clearer than anything you've heard before, says, "Write what you see." You bolt upright. Write. You're not a scribe. You're not even educated like the monks. You can read and recite scripture, sure, but you've never written a book. You've barely written a letter. Still, The message keeps echoing. Write what you see. You hesitate. You pray. You sweat through your robe and lie awake on your stone bed, asking God to send the message to someone else. Anyone else. Because if you speak up now, if you actually say you're receiving divine instructions, you could get into serious trouble. This isn't a time when people say, "Hey, I had a weird dream," and someone replies, "Cool, let's write a poem about it." No, this is medieval Europe. Speak out of turn, and you could get exorcised, or accused of heresy, or thrown into a deeper prison than the one you're already in. Historians still argue whether your reluctance was due to fear of the church or personal humility. Either way, you decide to stay silent for now. But the visions don't care about your fears. They keep coming. Meanwhile, the world around you changes. Yuta, your spiritual mentor, is growing older and stranger. She fasts almost constantly. Her skin is translucent, her voice barely audible. Her self-punishments are extreme. Hair shirts, thorny whips, days without food or water. You watch this with a mix of awe and quiet horror. Is this holiness? Or something darker? One day, she collapses mid-prayer. The monks carry her away, and she doesn't return for weeks. When she does, she's weaker than ever, but she still refuses to speak about death. You sit beside her, reciting the Psalms, wondering what happens when your only guide leaves this world. Because you know it's coming. Not long after, Yuta dies. The monks break the seal of your enclosure and take her body away for burial. And for the first time since childhood, you breathe open air. You blink into the sky like someone waking from a long dream. But the moment doesn't feel freeing, it feels terrifying. Because now, you're in charge. Suddenly, everyone looks to you. The other young nuns, who've joined the cell over the years, wait for your decisions. Monks come to you for advice. There's no more hiding in Yuta's shadow. And still, the voice inside says, "Right." You finally give in. With trembling hands, you start describing the visions, not in private journals, but aloud, to a trusted monk named Volmar. He's skeptical at first, then terrified, then fascinated. He begins to copy your words, realizing you're not just describing dreams, you're constructing an entire theology. Images of God, of the cosmos, of moral law and divine justice. All in symbols, fire, and light. You say the visions come not in dreams, but in full waking consciousness. That you see the living light. That's your name for God's presence, a force that consumes nothing and explains everything. Your words are vivid, strange, sometimes borderline sci-fi. Flaming eyes. Multi-winged creatures. Great domes of light suspended over cities. You talk, Volmar writes, and other nuns listen, some in awe, some in growing anxiety. Here's a strange little tidbit. You never claimed to understand your own visions completely. You just described what you saw. Later theologians would spend entire careers trying to decode you. One bishop even tried to draw diagrams based on your words and ended up with something that looked like an exploding snail. True story. But your words, raw, radiant, wild, start making their way beyond the monastery walls. And soon, they catch the ear of someone much more powerful. A bishop. He asks to read what you've written. Then a cardinal. Then, unbelievably, a copy is sent to the Pope himself, Eugenius III. The same Pope who's trying to rally Europe for yet another crusade. You're still living in a crumbling hilltop monastery, trying to keep your writing safe from damp parchment and suspicious monks. You're half sure you'll get silenced or corrected or exiled. But instead, the Pope writes back and says, "Keep going." So there it is. The Pope himself has read your words, your visions, poured from the folds of your mind like fire through a keyhole, and instead of condemning you as a madwoman or heretic, he writes back, "Keep going." You're still in your small monastery, surrounded by suspicious stone and damp mountain fog, but suddenly your voice has permission to echo through the world. And not just permission, authority. This is no small thing. You're a woman, after all, and it's the 12th century. The church is a man's realm, monastic scholarship is a man's trade, and theological writing by a woman? That's a recipe for exile at best, flames at worst. Yet somehow, your words not only escape punishment, they're celebrated. Historians still argue whether Pope Eugenius genuinely understood the depth of your theology, or if he simply saw a useful tool in a charismatic visionary who could rally the faithful. Either way, he gives his blessing for you to keep transcribing your visions, and that blessing transforms your life. Your first great work begins to form under your hands. Civias, short for Cito Vias Domini, know the ways of the Lord. It's an explosion of thought and vision. Not just descriptions of what you see, but the meaning behind it. You map out nothing less than the spiritual architecture of the universe: creation, sin, redemption, the soul's journey, and even the coming end of time. And you don't hold back. You describe luminous female figures representing divine wisdom. Towers that symbolize the virtues. Cities inside the human heart. Wheels upon wheels of celestial machinery grinding out fate and mercy. Flaming eyes. Cosmic rivers. Singing stars. One of your more unsettling images. A massive woman, stretched across the cosmos, giving birth to light while monstrous shadows try to claw their way into her womb. Honestly, it sounds like something between a fever dream and the greatest album cover never made. But here's the real shock: it works. Monks, bishops, even noble women begin requesting copies of your writings. Not just to marvel at your visions, but to study them. You become something of a theological rock star, even though you've never left your cloister. Not yet. Your name spreads far beyond Disibodenberg. Which brings us to a turning point. You've now outgrown the very monastery that raised you. By your mid-40s, the community of women under your care has doubled, then tripled. You're not just a visionary anymore. You're the leader of a thriving spiritual sisterhood. You manage the nuns' daily routines, their studies, their work in the garden and infirmary. You instruct them in herbal medicine, in music, in moral philosophy. And you do it all while channeling visions that still come like thunder. And frankly, the monks are starting to get a little uncomfortable. Because, well, you're a woman with influence. You're attracting donations. Pilgrims. Wealthy girls who want to join your convent, not theirs. And perhaps worst of all, you're asking to relocate. That's right. You decide it's time to leave. You want to move your growing sisterhood to Rupertsberg, a new site further down the Rhine. More space, more freedom, more light. You believe the visions are telling you to go there. The monks, of course, say absolutely not. You're stunned. You argue. They refuse. So, you get sick. No, really. You collapse. You grow pale and feverish. You stop eating. Some suspect it's divine punishment for disobedience. Others whisper you're staging the whole thing. But your condition worsens until even the monks panic. They finally consult a higher authority. And that's when Archbishop Henry of Mainz steps in and sides with you. It's official. You can move. You rise from your sickbed like a resurrected prophet and lead your nuns down the river valley to Rupertsberg, where you build something incredible from almost nothing. A new convent rises, sharply angled rooftops nestled beside the Rhine. You plant gardens, construct dormitories, even commission a scriptorium where your visions can be copied and sent across Europe. Here's a fun detail most people miss. You design the layout of the new convent yourself. Every corner, every corridor, reflects not just practicality but spiritual symbolism. You even plan the acoustics so that your music, yes, you're composing that too, reverberates in certain ways at Vespers. You're not just a mystic. You're a project manager with divine blueprints. The nuns flourish in their new home. The air is fresher. The water is cleaner. And, for once, the rules are yours. Not the monks. Not Rome's. Yours. And you run a tight but joyful ship. But don't get too cozy, because your fame is only just beginning. People start arriving at your gate with questions, prayers, and ailments. Nobles, peasants, clergy, they all come. And you meet them. Advise them. Heal them. You examine their eyes, their skin, their diet. You prescribe herbal tinctures, special diets, sacred chants. You observe patterns in behavior and tie them to physical symptoms in ways that sound shockingly modern. You even speculate on the influence of the moon on the human mind. That's right. You're basically running a medieval wellness clinic and a metaphysical think tank on the side. Here's a quirky tidbit. You describe a condition we now associate with migraines, bright flashing lights, nausea, even synesthesia. Some modern neurologists have suggested that what you called the living light might have had a neurological basis. But to you, it's spiritual. You never doubted that. Meanwhile, you begin writing more. Not just visions, treatises. Practical medicine, natural history, theology, letters. So many letters. You correspond with kings and queens, with abbots and popes, even with Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor. Imagine that, a woman, writing spiritual advice to the most powerful man in Europe and expecting him to listen. You don't just advise. You scold. You tell bishops to shape up. You warn entire regions of moral collapse. And people listen. Not bad for a girl who once wasn't allowed to open her own front door. By now, you're not just a visionary. You're a phenomenon. Your convent at Rupertsberg hums with purpose, its stone walls catching the glow of candles and the echo of plainsong. The gardens bloom with the herbs you catalogued in your Physica, your treatise on natural remedies. Saffron, fennel, lavender, some to heal, some to soothe, and some just because the bees love them. And yes, you're still writing. You finish Civias, a sprawling, radiant work stuffed with fire-breathing allegory and cosmic architecture. But you don't stop there. The visions keep coming, and so you begin a second massive book, Liber Vitae Meritorum, the Book of Life's Merits. This time, you're less focused on what the universe looks like and more on how humans fit into it, how good and evil wrestle inside the human soul, how virtues and vices dress up and parade like characters in a medieval morality play. You give them names, faces. You animate pride and humility like puppet theater with theological bite. It's moral psychology, centuries before Freud. Each page practically shouts. The virtues stand tall, glowing and noble. The vices skulk in the margins, slimy, shifty, proud. You warn that we're not just victims of sin, we choose to let it fester. But you always leave room for redemption. You never let your fire burn without offering a way to warm your hands. Still, you're not writing from some ivory tower. In fact, you start traveling. Yes, traveling. Like, actual horse and cart, muddy road, someone hold my relics kind of traveling. This is pretty unheard of for a cloistered nun. Women didn't exactly go on lecture tours in the 12th century. But you do. You crisscross the Rhineland, giving sermons in cathedral pulpits. You address townsfolk, clergy, nobles, anyone who'll listen. And they do listen. You speak about corruption in the church, the need for inner purity, the danger of complacency. And you do it not as a meek servant of God, but as someone possessed by celestial authority. Remember, you've still got the Pope's blessing. You carry it like armor. Even the bishops have to let you through the door. You preach at Trier, Wurzburg, Bamberg. Crowds gather. Men argue whether it's even proper to listen to a woman speak theology in public. One priest supposedly calls you a brazen trumpet of feminine arrogance. You reply, essentially, then cover your ears, brother. I'm not speaking for myself. Your sermons are bold. They aren't the usual sleepy warnings about sin and modesty. You speak of power, justice, divine harmony. You rail against bishops who hoard wealth and neglect the poor. You tell them that God's light is not confined to gender or hierarchy, it moves where it wills. Historians still debate what gave you this rare license. Some say it was timing, your voice rose during a moment when the church needed moral reformers. Others say it was your charisma, or perhaps your physical fragility added to the mystique. After all, how threatening could a sickly nun with luminous eyes really be? Turns out, very threatening. Because you don't just preach. You predict. You warn of floods and plagues. You speak of distant lands rising in power. You mention stars falling and kingdoms crumbling. Some people call you prophetic. Others accuse you of stoking fear. But you never claim the words are yours. You say they come from the light. And that's the difference. Even emperors take notice. Frederick Barbarossa, yes, that Barbarossa receives letters from you. You address him like a stern aunt scolding a reckless nephew. You warn him not to favor antipopes or crush church reform. You tell him straight, you may wear the crown, but you don't hold the flame. Shockingly, he doesn't retaliate. In fact, you become something of a court advisor, at a distance. Letters flow back and forth. He listens. Not always, but often enough. That alone would have earned you a footnote in history. But remember, you're not finished. As your influence grows, so do your responsibilities. You open a second convent, across the river at Bingen. Why? Because girls are arriving faster than you can house them. You refuse to turn anyone away. If they're willing to pray, sing, and wash dishes, there's room. You oversee both convents. Write letters. Compose music. Receive pilgrims. And still, the visions come. Here's a quirky little detail. You start referring to yourself as a feather on the breath of God. It's a line that gets quoted centuries later, painted on church walls and printed on coffee mugs. But in your time, it's both humility and boldness. You're saying, I'm nothing, but I'm caught in something bigger. One of your letters contains this zinger. Even in a stone, there is a spark of life. A reminder that nothing is truly without spirit. You say the earth itself is bursting with divine energy. That everything vibrates with music we can't always hear. And speaking of music, oh, you're composing like a woman possessed. Your collection Symphonia Harmoniae Celestium Revelationum, or Symphony of the Harmony of Heavenly Revelations, includes over 70 pieces. Not just chants, but intricate, soaring melodies that push the limits of medieval notation. Your music feels lighter, freer than the Gregorian standards of the day. Some scholars call it the first truly feminine liturgical music. And yes, you write both the music and the lyrics. That's like being the band, the choir, and the sound engineer while also running a hospital and writing cosmic prophecy. You're redefining what a nun can be, what a woman can be, what a human can be when they say yes to the voice in the storm. And still, the visions burn. At this point, you're in your 60s, grey-haired, bone-tired, and still very much a force of nature. The Rhine flows steadily past Rupertsberg, and from your windows you can see the steeples of mines in the hazy distance. But your eyes don't linger on cities. They look up. Always up. The visions have never stopped. In fact, if anything, they're growing more intense. You feel the pressure in your skull long before the fire appears. It's like something ancient is winding itself tighter behind your eyes. And then, light. Always the light. And sound. Loud sound. This might surprise people today. Most folks picture medieval visions as hushed, delicate things. But not yours. Your visions roar. You describe them as blazing flames and resounding voices, as though the divine doesn't whisper to you, it shouts. Some scholars today have suggested that you may have experienced a form of aural migraine or even temporal lobe epilepsy. The flashing lights. The rushing sounds. The sensory overload. Maybe, they say, your theology was born from neurology. But that doesn't feel right to you. To you, these are messages, not malfunctions. You record them. You sketch diagrams. And you begin your final, most complex theological work, Liber Divinorum Operum, the Book of Divine Works. It's your masterpiece. You begin it at 70, which, for medieval standards, is basically a miracle in itself. While other people your age are quietly fading into their deathbeds, you're channeling cosmic architecture onto vellum. In Liber Divinorum, you go big, like cosmic blueprint big. You describe the macrocosm and microcosm, the divine order of the stars mirrored in the folds of the human soul. You see the body as a miniature universe. The lungs, the moon. The heart, the sun. The intestines, oddly enough, represent earthly struggle. Go figure. You speak of cosmic wheels turning in harmony, each human action rippling outward into eternity. It's part physics, part mysticism, part spiritual manifesto. And there's this recurring image, the cosmic man. A radiant human figure stretched across the heavens, full of stars, organs, fire, and wisdom. You suggest that understanding God means understanding ourselves. That the soul is the mirror of the cosmos, and vice versa. It's a vision that predates Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man by 3 centuries. In fact, a lot of what you say starts to feel weirdly modern. You hint at ecological ethics, suggesting that the earth has its own dignity, and that humanity's role is stewardship, not domination. You write that the natural world sings its own praises to God, even without human words. The rustling leaves, the tides, the winds, all forms of worship. And here's a quirky twist. You theorize that laughter is holy. That joy isn't a sin, but a spiritual strength. In a world where monks flagellate themselves and sermons focus on doom, you say joy is essential to the soul's health. Imagine that, divine joy as medicine. If that's not ahead of your time, what is? Meanwhile, your music continues to spread. Nuns perform your compositions in liturgical processions. The soaring melodies you wrote, sometimes with 12-note jumps that would scare most singers, are now echoing through cathedrals across the empire. Your voice, in a way, has become a permanent part of worship. Still, not everyone is thrilled. There's growing tension between you and local church officials. Some whisper that you've grown too bold, too loud, too female. And then, you do something that gets you in real trouble. A young nobleman dies unexpectedly. He had asked to be buried at your convent. You say yes. You hold the ceremony. You bury him. But the local bishop finds out and flips his mitre. You see, the young man had been excommunicated. Technically, he was not supposed to be buried in sacred ground. The bishop demands that you exhume the body and remove it. Immediately, you refuse. You write that the man had confessed his sins, that his soul was at peace, that denying him a holy burial would be an offense to mercy, not justice. And in a move that's, well, pretty metal for a nun, you hide the body. That's right. You have it moved, secretly, and you don't say where. The bishop retaliates with a rare and painful punishment, interdict. It means your entire convent is silenced. No mass, no music, no sacraments, no communion. For months, the sisters walk in silence. Your bells are stilled. Your songs forbidden. You, the woman of fire and sound, are plunged into forced quiet. It's agony. But you don't cave. You write impassioned letters to the bishop, to church officials, even to the emperor. You argue not from defiance but from compassion. You remind them that mercy is higher than law, that your decision wasn't heresy, it was love. It takes nearly a year. But finally, victory. The interdict is lifted. You celebrate with a full-sung mass and, of course, music. Soaring, complicated, radiant music. One nun later writes that it felt like the sky had reopened. By now, you're nearing the end. You've lived nearly 80 years, an extraordinary age for your time. You've outlasted popes, emperors, bishops. You've written theology, music, science, and poetry. You've preached across cities, challenged corruption, healed the sick, and seen the stars open like scrolls. And still, there are no statues. No canonization. Not yet. In fact, your final years are surprisingly quiet. Not silent, of course, you never go silent, but the fire begins to soften. Your letters slow. Your visions dim. But before the end, you make one last observation. You write that the soul, at death, rises in sound. You describe it not as fading, but as becoming music. You say that at the moment of death, a person's true note is added to the great celestial harmony. A final chord. And then, you are gone. Not forgotten. Just floating in the quiet measure between one divine breath and the next. The bells toll softly in the valley of the Rhine. A mist curls along the riverbank like a sigh. You're gone now, physically, yes, but your presence clings to the stones of Rupertsberg like incense in a chapel long after the prayers have ended. But of course, the story doesn't stop with your death. Because now begins something almost stranger than your visions, the long, confusing journey toward sainthood and the centuries of debate that come with it. Let's be honest, people don't quite know what to do with you. You weren't martyred. You didn't live in extreme isolation. You didn't bleed stigmata or levitate or tame wolves. What you did do was write. And teach. And lead. And some folks, especially men in red hats, aren't quite ready to canonize someone who once scolded emperors in poetic Latin. So what happens? Well, your followers waste no time. Almost immediately after your death in 1179, your nuns begin collecting stories. They preserve your letters. They copy your visions. They sing your songs with even greater urgency, as though keeping your voice alive will keep the fire burning. And it works, sort of. You gain a cult following. Not a creepy cult, mind you. A religious one. That's the term for local veneration, before official sainthood. People come to pray at your tomb. They whisper your name when their crops fail. They claim healings after touching your manuscripts. One story even says a blind woman regained her sight just by holding your veil. Miracles? Maybe. But official sainthood? That's trickier. Your followers petitioned the church 3 separate times in the 13th century. Each time, they hit a wall. Politics. Papal distraction. Changing criteria. Some say it's your gender. Others say it's your theology. You don't quite fit the mold. And here's where it gets fringe. Some documents mysteriously disappear. Others are misfiled or forgotten. Historians still argue whether there was deliberate resistance or just bureaucratic sloppiness. Either way, your sainthood gets stuck in celestial limbo. But your legacy refuses to be buried. In the 14th century, the Dominicans rediscover your writings and copy them widely. In the 15th, artists start illustrating your visions with gold and fire, your cosmic mandalas becoming medieval wall art. And then, something incredible. Your music survives. Unlike many other female composers of the era, whose chants were lost or absorbed into anonymous collections, yours remain intact. The nuns of your order preserve them with almost obsessive care. They're copied across abbeys. protected, sung. Which means, somehow, against all odds, your voice literally continues to echo. Fast forward to the 19th century, when German scholars begin publishing your works in modern editions. And people go, wait, a woman wrote all this? In the 1100s, academic jaws hit the cobblestones. Suddenly, you're not just a footnote. You're a revelation. By the 20th century, your name resurfaces in theology, music, and even feminist thought. Some scholars see you as a proto-environmentalist. Others call you the first female doctor of natural science. Some go further and claim you're the spiritual grandmother of holistic medicine. That last one? A bit of a stretch, maybe, but not totally off. You wrote about the balance of the four humours, the healing power of plants, and the connection between body and soul long before it was trendy. You basically anticipated modern integrative medicine, with a side of divine lightning. Oh, and your writing style? Still spicy. Readers in the modern era discover that your Latin is punchy, strange, poetic. You don't just say God is powerful. You say God is the living fire through which all breathes. You call the devil the puffed-up worm of shadow. Even your insults are artful. And that brings us to, finally, your official sainthood. It takes until 2012. That's not a typo. 8 centuries after your death, Pope Benedict XVI canonizes you officially and declares you a doctor of the Church, one of only 4 women to receive that title. The others? Teresa of Avila, Catherine of Siena, and Therese of Lisieux. Not bad company. And you? You're the oldest of them by a few hundred years. Doctor of the Church means your teachings are considered universally important. Binding. Worth studying until the stars burn out. You join the theological all-stars, and it only took, 800 years and a few dozen miracles. Still, even now, not everyone agrees on how to label you. Some call you a mystic, which sounds romantic but risks making you seem vague or floaty. Others call you a theologian, though that feels too buttoned up for someone who described divine visions as burning wheels covered in eyes. A few braver scholars say it outright. You were a prophet. The last great Christian prophet. Not metaphorically. Not figuratively. Just, literally. Historians still argue whether that's accurate or even theologically acceptable. But they can't argue with your output. Your writings remain some of the most extensive by any woman in the Middle Ages. Maybe in history. And people are still uncovering layers. In 2021, researchers found new links between your visions and ancient Jewish mystical texts. Others explore the gender-fluid language in your writings. You often speak of God as both mother and father, flame and breath, voice and silence. It's weird. It's beautiful. It's you. Today, your music is performed in concert halls. Your chants appear in film scores. Your quotes show up on bookmarks, tattoos, and mental health posters. Not always in context, but still spreading. And your visions? Still loud. Whether you're perched on a Spotify playlist or tucked into a Vatican archive, the truth remains, you broke through every barrier. Class. Gender. Illness. Time. A feather on the breath of God? Maybe. But a feather can still slice through stone when the wind behind it is strong enough. You're dead, canonized, sung in Gothic cathedrals and college chapels alike, but let's rewind for a moment. Because while your music and mysticism get most of the spotlight today, there's something that often gets tucked into the footnotes. You were a scientist. Not a lab coat and beakers kind of scientist, of course, but a medieval naturalist. A cataloguer of herbs, minerals, animal behaviors, and bodily functions. And in the 12th century, that was wild enough. So tonight, we're flipping through your other great work, the Physica and Causae et Curae, your two-part exploration of the natural world and medicine. Think of it like your version of WEBMD, but with more leeches and cosmic allegory. You start with plants. Hundreds of them. Yarrow, rosemary, valerian, fennel. You don't just list them, you give them character. Fennel, you write, has the warmth of the sun, and is good for eyesight because it carries the light within it. That's a lovely sentiment until you realize you've just recommended boiled fennel juice as an eye wash. Good luck with that. Then animals. You document dogs, cats, oxen, snakes, bees. You believe some animals have healing natures. Doves bring peace, lions signify courage, and hedgehogs, get this, are great for indigestion. Just, not alive. You prescribe powdered hedgehog liver, mixed with wine. Tastes like victory? And here's where it gets spicy. You aren't just copying ancient texts. A lot of this you're observing firsthand. You talk with beekeepers. You walk through gardens. You watch the behavior of worms, toads, goats. You listen. You study. And you write. This wasn't typical for a woman in your position. Or anyone, really. Most abbesses don't publish medical encyclopedias. But you saw knowledge as sacred. Understanding nature meant understanding God's fingerprints on the world. So in your mind, biology equals theology. You classify illnesses by the four humours, yes, that old Greco-Roman idea that the body balances blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. But you put your own spin on it. You say disease doesn't just come from bad humours. It also comes from moral imbalance. Too greedy, you might get gout. Too lazy, watch out for digestive issues. Arrogance, you claim, inflames the liver. Which means if medieval people followed your logic, confession was basically a wellness checkup. And some of your cures are genuinely helpful even by modern standards. You use lavender for calming nerves, peppermint for nausea, willow bark for pain, a natural precursor to aspirin. You recommend fasting, warm baths, fresh air. You say emotional health affects physical health, which now seems obvious, but back then was borderline revolutionary. Still, some treatments haven't aged well. You warn that left-handed women are more prone to melancholia. You advise burning mouse droppings for cough relief. And in one truly bizarre case, you suggest placing a dead mole on a person's chest to relieve respiratory distress. You don't say whether it should be warm or room temperature. But let's not forget, you're working without microscopes, without antibiotics, without germ theory. The fact that you're attempting systematic medical analysis at all is jaw-dropping. And your writing isn't cold or clinical. It's poetic. You describe the human body as a miniature universe. You compare organs to celestial bodies. The heart is a sun. The liver, a moon. The lungs breathe the divine air. You say illness throws this harmony out of tune, and healing is like retuning a sacred instrument. That metaphor echoes through all your work. The body as an instrument. The cosmos as a symphony. The soul as both listener and performer. And you're the composer. One of the most fascinating quirks in your writings? The idea of viriditas. You use this Latin term over and over. It roughly translates to greening power, or life force. But it's more than just poetic biology. For you, viriditas is the pulse of the divine in living things. It's the energy that makes a seed sprout, a leaf unfurl, a human heal. It's God's chlorophyll, basically. You say that true health of the body, of the soul, of the land is measured by viriditas. If it withers, so does the person. If it thrives, so does everything around them. It's such a beautiful, weirdly pagan-sounding idea that modern eco-theologians have latched onto it. Today, viriditas appears in spiritual retreats, herbalist blogs, even holistic yoga courses. It's gone viral, 800 years after you coined it. But back in your own time, not everyone is on board. Some clerics criticize your medical writings as womanly or earthy. They say you focus too much on the body, not enough on the soul. You disagree. You argue that the two are bound like vines on a trellis. And if one suffers, so does the other. You keep writing. You keep healing. You instruct your nuns in basic surgery, herbal tinctures, midwifery, and patient care. Your convent becomes known not just as a center of prayer, but as a center of wellness. Women send their daughters to study under you. Sick travelers beg sanctuary. And perhaps most radically of all, you believe women are particularly gifted in healing. You say women's connection to birth, blood, and the moon gives them a special insight into the rhythms of nature. Not inferior. Not dangerous. Sacred. Historians still argue whether this was truly feminist thinking or just convenient theology for a woman in charge of a lot of other women. Either way, it was rare. And it changed things. You didn't just preserve knowledge, you transformed it. Through vision. Through observation. Through very loud, very weird metaphors. You made medicine sing. The night hushes again, and this time you're not at your writing desk. You're in motion. Your veil flutters as you step out of the monastery gates, staff in hand, a trail of nuns behind you, marching towards something deeply unthinkable for a woman in your century, a second foundation. Because what's more dramatic than founding one abbey? Founding another, this time, in defiance of both monks and mountains. You're in your mid-50s now. Most people your age in the 1100s are winding down, preparing for the long nap with the saints. But you're gearing up for war. Not with weapons, but with relocation papers, strong-willed determination, and a choir of fierce women at your back. Rupertsberg is your beloved home, yes, but it's getting crowded. Your fame draws noble daughters from across the Rhineland, girls with visions, with voices, with no desire to be married off to smelly barons. Your nuns need space. Spiritual space. Literal space. And so you set your sights on the high cliffs of the Disibodenberg. Problem is, the monks there say no. Absolutely not. The land is theirs, the buildings are theirs, and frankly, who do you think you are? Oh, right. Hildegard of Bingen. You argue. You write. You appeal. The monks say it'll never happen. Historians still argue whether it was plain old sexism or a real concern over losing power, or rent. Likely both. The monks don't want an independent female abbey siphoning prestige from their authority. So what do? You get sick. Like, dramatically sick. You collapse. You waste away. Your body becomes limp, your voice vanishes. Your nuns panic. They pray. They beg. They send word back to the monks, look what you've done, and then, miraculously, you recover. Right around the same time the monks concede the land. Coincidence? Medieval divine protest? Holy manipulation? Historians still argue whether this was a true psychosomatic collapse or a carefully staged bit of righteous theatre. Either way, it works. You get your land. And thus, Bingen Abbey is born. Tucked high in the hills, it overlooks the Rhine like a fortress of female defiance. You build a cloister, a chapel, gardens. You make sure it runs independently, with its own rule, its own hierarchy, and yes, its own infirmary and herb garden. You aren't just founding a place to pray. You're building a laboratory of light. The two monasteries, Rupertsberg and Bingen, now form a kind of divine circuit. You travel between them, teaching, composing, treating patients, scolding clergy, writing letters, transcribing visions. You never stop. One scholar calls you the only medieval woman we know who wore out a horse. And you do. More than once. Oh, and by this point, You're not just famous. You're legendary. Kings write to you. So do queens, bishops, abbots. Even Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, mid-crusade, asks your advice on imperial policy. You tell him, graciously but firmly, to watch his pride, because that sort of thing tends to topple empires. You even correspond with Eleanor of Aquitaine, the most powerful woman in Europe. You both understand what it means to wield power in a man's world and how to survive the judgment that comes with it. Some letters are sharp. Others are warm. One young nun writes you for guidance, and you reply with this oddly modern gem. A person who has a musical soul can be troubled by the dark moods of others. That's you. Still reading people like musical instruments. But perhaps the most extraordinary part of this period, your independence. You don't answer to a bishop. You don't answer to an abbot. You answer to your conscience, and to the visions that still strike you like spiritual lightning in the middle of the night. And those visions, they're changing. They grow more urgent, more apocalyptic. You see the church corrupted by greed, the world teetering on disaster. You don't just see light anymore, you see fire. Collapse. Reform. It scares some people. One nobleman accuses you of heresy. You laugh him off with 20 lines of Latin and a warning about eternal damnation. You are, at this point, unbothered. One of your final major works from this era is Liber Divinorum Operum, the Book of Divine Works. It's massive. Cosmic. It's your full theory of creation, time, and the soul, laced with imagery that still baffles scholars today. In it, you describe the human body as a mirror of the universe. You say that all things are connected in divine harmony, stars, bones, oceans, thoughts. That God breathes through every atom. That the soul is not just an internal thing, it radiates. That love, when properly ordered, is a form of cosmic gravity. It's theology. It's mysticism. But it's also science fiction, in the best way. And you illustrate it with mandala-like visions, orbs of fire, wheels of eyes, radiant human forms encircled by galaxies and beasts. Modern artists still borrow your visuals for album covers, tarot decks, and digital art. But again, not everyone gets it. Some call it madness. Others, divine inspiration. Historians still argue whether your last visions were signs of a mind unraveling or ascending. Meanwhile, back at the abbey, you continue mentoring. Young women arrive in droves to learn under you. You teach them medicine, chant, philosophy, scriptural exegesis. You let them argue. You let them question. You give them something priceless, a place to think out loud. And when some of them begin to see visions, too, you don't scoff. You listen. You guide. You help them shape their chaos into clarity. Just like you did. By now, you're well into your 70s. In an era when life expectancy often hovered around 30, you're ancient. Wrinkled. Luminous. Still scribbling. Still walking the monastery paths in your leather sandals, humming your own music under your breath. No one dares question your authority anymore. And maybe that's the real miracle, not just that you survived, but that you thrived. That you carved out a legacy while still alive. Even the monks eventually bow their heads when you pass. Because by now, they know, this isn't just a woman with visions. This is a living cathedral. You wake one morning, and the air feels different. Heavier, maybe. Slower. The stone walls of your abbey hum faintly, as if holding their breath. You're in your 80s now, a miracle in itself, and while your legs have grown slow and your hands less steady, your mind still feels like it's wired directly to the stars. But time, even for prophets, runs out. The visions never stop. If anything, they get louder, brighter, tinged now with endings. You begin seeing wheels within wheels, collapsing cities, beasts slouching toward ruin. There's no gentle fade-out here. No quiet retirement. You burn through your last years like a candle that refuses to go out politely. And you're still writing. One of your final major confrontations comes not with a noble or a bishop, but with a corpse. A dead man, buried on monastery land. You know almost nothing about him, except that he had received the sacraments and asked to be laid to rest near holy ground. Problem: the church says no. He was excommunicated, and by canon law, can't be buried on sacred soil. The local clergy demand that you dig him up. You refuse. You refuse so hard that you get excommunicated yourself. Yes, Hildegard of Bingen, seer of the divine and composer of angelic choirs, ends up excommunicated for protecting a dead guy. Mass is banned at your abbey. Sacraments are denied. Your nuns are barred from singing. It is, for you, a kind of death sentence. Because silence, after a lifetime of music and revelation, is unbearable. But you don't back down. You write a scorching letter to the Archbishop, laying out a celestial-level rebuke. You argue that God, not Rome, judges souls. That mercy is divine law. And that your visions confirm the man's spiritual restoration. Eventually, the authorities blink. The ban is lifted. Mass returns. And you, quietly triumphant, step once more into the chapel, raise your frail hands, and begin to sing. Your voice ancient, trembling, sounds like cracked gold. And your final years. They are filled with letters. So many letters. You write to princes, abbots, young nuns, old enemies. You scold with poetry. You praise with warnings. You tell one abbot to stop hoarding money and another to stop wearing fancy robes. You tell a countess to renounce your vanity and listen more. Honestly, you could have had a solid YouTube commentary channel. Some letters are full of fire. Others, sorrow. You seem to feel the world tipping. You warn of corruption in the church, of leaders addicted to power, of love growing cold. You describe it all in apocalyptic language, seas boiling, suns turning black, angels weeping. But between the lines, something else flickers, hope. You write that the divine still speaks. That the world can still change. That even in decay, beauty endures. One final letter includes this haunting line. The soul is symphonic. You mean that everything resonates together. That each person is a note, and together we make a holy melody or a terrible noise. And maybe that's your final gift, teaching us to listen for harmony. You die in 1179, on September 17th. The night is reportedly quiet. No thunder, no trumpets. Just the soft rustle of wind in the vineyard leaves outside your abbey window. Some say the stars looked brighter that night. Others say the nuns saw a glowing light above your bed. Historians still argue whether these are hagiographic embellishments or eyewitness memories. Probably a little of both. You are buried at Rupertsberg. 4 centuries, pilgrims will come to your tomb, some seeking miracles, others simply to be near the woman who sang the visions of God into being. But your story doesn't end in stone. In the centuries after your death, your works scatter. Your music is sung in cathedrals across Europe. Your medical texts are copied into monastic libraries. Your visions are studied, dismissed, rediscovered, dismissed again, and finally honored. The abbey at Rupertsberg is destroyed in the 30 Years' War. Its stones scattered. Your relics, what's left of them, are eventually moved to Eibingen. The original manuscripts of your visions, they pass hand to hand, generation to generation, surviving fire, flood, and sheer medieval carelessness. Fast forward to the 20th century, and your name roars back to life. Feminist theologians find your work and proclaim you a patron saint of intellectual women. Eco-activists discover your theories of viriditas and hold you up as a medieval environmentalist. New Age mystics read your visions like cosmic poetry. Scholars comb your music, stunned by its range, its haunting tonalities, its unorthodox modes. You're called the first female composer whose name we know. In 2012, over 800 years after your death, Pope Benedict XVI declares you a Doctor of the Church. That's an honor given to only a few dozen figures in all of Catholic history. And you're only the fourth woman to receive it. Your title now officially reads, Saint Hildegard of Bingen, Doctor of the Church. Not bad for a girl who started out locked behind convent walls with migraine-fueled visions and no formal education. And your music? Oh, it still plays. In concert halls. In medieval chant festivals. In synth-infused remixes. On ambient YouTube playlists titled Celestial Sleep Music. People still close their eyes to your melodies. Still lose themselves in your spinning cosmic wheels, your blazing mandalas, your golden-winged angels. Even if they don't know your name, they feel something. A vibration. A harmony. A single note, still echoing after 8 centuries. The silence after your death doesn't last long. First, it's the nuns, your nuns, who keep your memory alive. They copy your texts, chant your songs, whisper your prophecies in candlelit dormitories. They know what the world has lost, and they're not about to let your voice vanish. Manuscripts are lovingly preserved, sometimes tucked into niches behind altars or hidden inside wooden panels during times of war. You'd appreciate the irony, your boldest visions now smuggled like contraband prayers. But outside those cloisters, the world spins onward. Empires rise. Plagues sweep through. The Black Death comes and goes. The Renaissance dawns, but you're not in the spotlight. Not yet. Part of it is the Latin. Part of it is the handwriting. But mostly, the world forgets to listen. Historians still argue whether you were too mystical for the philosophers or too female for the theologians, or, let's be honest, both. A visionary woman writing about divine cosmology? That's not exactly bestseller material in the age of reason. Still, there are sparks. In 1500s Germany, Reformation-era thinkers find your apocalyptic writings useful for criticizing corruption in the church. Some quote you to validate their own doomsday warnings. Others dismiss you as that nun who saw too much. Then centuries pass. Dust thickens. Your Rupertsberg Abbey is burned to the ground in the 1600s during the 30 Years' War. Nothing but ruins. Rubble. But Eibingen survives. And with it, the sisters who still sing your chants softly now, in small choirs, during Vespers. Your bones, or what's claimed to be your bones, are moved. Relics get divided, relocated, misplaced, and rediscovered. One skull fragment ends up in Cologne. Another relic turns up in a small German chapel. Historians still argue whether any of it is truly yours. You'd probably roll your eyes and tell them to focus on the message, not the packaging. Meanwhile, your manuscripts wander. Some end up in libraries in Wiesbaden and Heidelberg. Others make it to private collections. A few go missing entirely. One, the Resen Codex, your largest surviving compilation, is nearly lost to time until a savvy 19th century librarian recognizes its significance and saves it from decay. It weighs over 15 pounds. Think about that. 15 pounds of hand-copied Hildegard, packed with visions, letters, theology, songs, and prophecies. It's almost comically enormous. You'd probably laugh at the sight of it being wheeled around on a library cart like some holy behemoth. Then, boom! The 20th century happens. And suddenly, the world remembers you. It starts with the mystics and musicologists. Then the feminists. Then the herbalists. Then the medieval scholars. Each finds something different in your work. You become this glowing constellation that everyone wants to map. Academic conferences are held in your name. Doctors re-examine your medical texts. Linguists study your invented words and syntax. One scholar tries to recreate your recipes for medicinal beer. Another analyzes your chant melodies for mathematical precision. You are, somehow, ahead of your time and utterly of your time, all at once. And the music? It's reborn. Modern choirs rediscover your songs, and people can't quite believe what they're hearing. Your compositions are long, floating, almost weightless. They don't fit neatly into modern notation systems. There are no bar lines. No rhythm markers. Just this sacred drift, like you're trying to write down the breath of an angel. Singers say performing your music feels like slipping into a trance. Audiences describe it as liquid serenity. A few contemporary composers even borrow your modal scales and weirdly addictive intervals. They call your work proto-ambient, celestial, hypnotic. And you're not just studied now. You're sampled. DJs remix your chants into electronic tracks. Ambient musicians layer your vocals over synth drones. You show up on soundtracks. Your melodies float through wellness spas, indie films, even dance floors in Berlin. Somewhere, some tattooed 23-year-old is swaying to your chant under strobe lights. You'd be confused, maybe, but also kind of flattered. Then there's the Hildegard boom. Books, podcasts, documentaries, graphic novels. You become the subject of TED Talks and academic symposia. You're turned into a patron saint of women's creativity, ecological mindfulness, even psychedelic spirituality. A few modern nuns call you the first Benedictine influencer. And of course, in 2012, the Vatican finally makes it official. You are Saint Hildegard of Bingen, Doctor of the Church. They add your feast day to the liturgical calendar, September 17th. Right there beside the greats. It took 833 years. But hey, the Church moves slowly. And in a world that often forgets its own prophets, your survival feels divine. You are no longer a medieval curiosity. You're a bridge between eras, between art and science, between mystery and meaning. You are, as one scholar put it, the woman who saw everything and still sang. And somehow, across the abyss of centuries, you're still singing. Your visions, those wild wheels of fire and light, now adorn book covers and concert posters. Your mandalas inspire digital artists and tattooists. Your healing recipes are reprinted in holistic cookbooks. Your name is whispered in yoga studios and chanted in cathedrals. It's hard to say what you'd make of it all. The fan pages. The Instagram tributes. The herbal tinctures with your face on the bottle. The pop saint status. But one thing is certain, you've outlived your time. Not quietly. Not in the footnotes. But with a voice that echoes, sometimes softly, sometimes fiercely, through every place where someone seeks light in the dark. And maybe that's the secret you knew all along. That vision isn't about seeing the future. It's about seeing the truth and daring to speak it. You've been dead for centuries now, and yet somehow, your voice still rattles the windows. That's the thing about visions, they're not polite. They don't stay buried. Especially not yours. Your words still flare off the page like a celestial flare-up. The soul is symphonic. The earth is alive with greenness. Fire is within all things. You were never trying to be a saint, a scholar, or a feminist icon. You were trying to survive the avalanche of God's voice inside your skull and explain it to people who didn't always want to hear. But now, people can't stop listening. Students in divinity schools pore over your letters. They highlight your rebukes in neon yellow and whisper your name in seminar discussions like you might appear in the doorway, annoyed, holding a cup of fennel tea and asking why the boys are still running everything. Your theology, once dismissed as dreamy and unstructured, is now studied as a complex vision of a universe in balance. A God who is not distant and mechanical, but intimate, enfolding, burning with life. And your cosmology? Oh, it's back in style. In an age of collapsing ecosystems, your idea of viriditas, that lush, greening force that pulses through all creation, feels radical again. You saw the earth not as a resource, but as a living organism, wrapped in divine breath. A cosmic garden that suffers when humans forget they are part of the soil. Some scholars argue this makes you the first Christian environmentalist. Others say you were simply channeling monastic gardening wisdom with a side of visionary poetry. Historians still debate whether you truly believed plants had souls or whether you just liked talking to herbs. Either way, Mother Earth is back on the altar, and you're one of her high priestesses. Meanwhile, your medicine gets a second look. Doctors and herbalists dig into your two big healing works, Physica and Causae et Curae. Inside are lists of plants, minerals, and animal parts, each with notes about their properties, temperatures, and uses. You suggest things like boiled fenugreek for lung problems, or powdered pearls for melancholy. Yes, pearls. Also, beaver testicles. Let's not dwell on that one. Modern practitioners pick and choose. Some of your treatments are too medieval to revive, see, powdered unicorn horn, but others, like hawthorn for heart health or fennel for digestion, line up surprisingly well with contemporary herbal science. There's even a Hildegardian wellness movement in Europe now, complete with retreats, bread recipes, and spelt-only diets. You are, without intending it, a lifestyle brand. Somewhere out there, a wellness blogger is wearing a linen robe, sipping nettle tea, and thanking you for your wisdom about liver function. Somewhere else, a death metal band is sampling your chant melodies for a concept album about medieval eschatology. Across the world, people meditate to your music, quote your visions, and hang your mandalas above their desks like sacred geometry dream catchers. And still, your voice cuts through. Because it's not just what you said. It's how you said it. You wrote like someone who knew fire intimately. You sang like someone who had seen eternity's teeth. And you kept your voice, even when it would have been easier to be quiet. Even when the church silenced your songs. Even when they buried your visions under layers of suspicion, gendered bias, and forgetfulness. You didn't just persist. You insisted. You made yourself impossible to erase. So what do we do with you now? A prophet who never asked for attention. A saint who wouldn't stop arguing. A visionary who painted the sky with words no one had heard before. You are not easily categorized. You're too mystical for the rationalists. Too orderly for the mystics. Too strange for the theologians. Too faithful for the skeptics. Too woman for the system. And that's the point. You weren't trying to fit in. You were trying to record what you saw, no matter how terrifying or beautiful or untranslatable it was. And in doing so, you created a spiritual language that transcends gender, doctrine, and century. You offered the world this bizarre, shimmering roadmap, half music, half thunderstorm. You handed us songs wrapped in golden wings and said, sing until something breaks. And people still do. Choirs rehearse your antiphons in chapels lit with soft gold. Young musicians score new pieces with your melodic fingerprints. A poet reads your visions and dreams of planets shaped like roses. A nun in India lights a candle on your feast day and sings one of your psalms into the dawn. Across time zones, across faiths, across disciplines, your light keeps flickering on. And still, there are questions. Was it divine inspiration, or neurological phenomena? Were your visions proof of mystical access, or migraines with dramatic flair? Did you create theology, or just survive it through song? Historians still argue. Neuroscientists weigh in. Theologians dissect your Latin. Musicologists count the melismas in your chants like pearls on a rosary. But none of them can extinguish the feeling people get when they hear your voice. That maybe, just maybe, God sounds like this. You're not supposed to be famous. That's not how the story of a cloistered 12th century nun usually goes. And yet, here you are, slipping your way into classrooms, playlists, spiritual retreats, and late-night YouTube wormholes. People search for your name at 2 a.m. because something about your words pulls at the edge of their dreams. Something about your fire doesn't go out. But for someone who heard divine trumpets in her head, your afterlife has been surprisingly quietly explosive. No fireworks. Just ripples. Growing wider. Touching everything. And not everyone's happy about that. The church, for example, has always had an awkward relationship with women who refuse to whisper. You fit squarely into that lineage alongside mystics like Teresa of Avila, Catherine of Siena, and Julian of Norwich. Women who didn't politely suggest spiritual ideas, but rather declared visions with the force of a thunderclap. Yes, they canonized you. Yes, they called you Doctor of the Church. But only after centuries of foot-dragging. Historians still argue whether your official sainthood was theology catching up with reality or just damage control for overlooking you in the first place. Either way, you never waited for permission. Back in your day, you wrote letters to emperors and popes like they were underperforming interns. You called out bishops, chastised corrupt clergy, and told Frederick Barbarossa to stop breaking the church like a kid wrecking a toy. And people listened. Not always happily, but they listened. And now, even secular thinkers quote you. You're invoked by spiritual naturalists, eco-theologians, music therapists, and queer Christian communities searching for someone who didn't fit but still thrived. You are canonized, yes, but also reclaimed. You have become a mirror. And mirrors, as you know, can be uncomfortable. People see what they want in you. A mystic, a rebel, a healer, a proto-scientist, a visionary feminist, a heretic wrapped in halos. Sometimes they forget you were also a woman with toothaches and doubts and a chronic headache that never quite went away. Still, you kept going. Because you had to. The visions weren't a hobby. They were a compulsion. You didn't ask for them. They cracked open your mind whether you wanted them or not. Remember how you described it. A blinding light that pierced your soul. A voice that wasn't quite sound, and yet felt like thunder in your bones. There was no turning that off. And so you didn't. You wrote it down. You sang it out. You painted it in words so wild they still make scholars squint at the Latin. And you survived by wrapping your visions in theology, in obedience, in art. You armored your truth with beauty, and it worked. Now, you're an icon. But not the polished kind. You're the kind people discover when they're burnt out and spiritually homesick. When they've had enough of transactional faith and need something greener, stranger, realer. Your God isn't one of rules and ledgers. Your God is breath, flame, blood, and thunder. A force pulsing through everything, from stars to nettles. It's messy. It's intense. It's terrifyingly alive. Which means, unsurprisingly, you don't appeal to everyone. Some dismiss you as fringe. A medieval curiosity. A mystic whose theology is more poetry than doctrine. A charming but ultimately impractical woman who saw spinning wheels in the sky and thought they meant something. Let them scoff. Because somewhere right now, a teenage girl who's never fit into a pew is reading your visions under the covers. Somewhere, a burnt-out priest is humming your chants in a hospital room. Somewhere, a music student is trying to notate your impossible intervals and wondering why it makes them cry. You're not a relic. You're a frequency. And once someone tunes in, they don't quite hear silence the same way again. Your influence isn't always loud. It's quiet like a seed cracking open. Like a chant that echoes just beyond the ear's reach. Like the way someone's breath changes when they read your words. I am the breath of the trumpet, I am the soul's spark, I am the dew that feeds the roots. You left us that. Not just a theology, not just music, but a way of noticing, a way of paying attention to the invisible hum beneath the surface of things. You taught us how to hear in technicolor, how to believe with our senses, how to survive vision. And now, centuries later, we're still learning. Your voice is being translated into languages you never heard, sung in cities that didn't exist when you were alive, and stitched into digital spaces you couldn't imagine. You wouldn't recognize the tech, but you'd recognize the longing behind it. The ache to see what's real beneath the static. Because you understood something eternal. That even in a world full of noise, truth rings. And when it does, it demands to be sung. You didn't invent the darkness. You just refused to let it win. By now, you've been dead almost 1,000 years. But you know the pattern. The world turns chaotic, the sky feels too quiet, and humans start wondering if it's all falling apart. Again. And here's where you, odd, luminous, stubborn you, step back in. Because when life is breaking, people don't reach for spreadsheets or neatly footnoted theology. They reach for fire. For music. For a voice that sounds like it's already looked death in the face and kept singing anyway. And that's you, Hildegard. They call it resonance, but really, it's something more ancient. Something fierce. A sense that you've seen into the deep and come back, not with easy answers, but better questions. Like, how do we heal when everything hurts? You never said healing was a checklist. You said it was rhythm. It was harmony. It was the body syncing with creation again. You wrote that sin was disconnection from nature, from self, from the divine breath that holds everything together. You didn't see health as just the absence of illness. You saw it as greening, as returning to that deep, sacred vitality that makes life vivid and good. And the modern world, God help it, is starving for that. There are therapists quoting your soul's symphony line on TikTok. There are mindfulness coaches referencing viriditas in PowerPoint slides. There's even a mental health journal titled Severs Now. You, the woman who feared no medieval diagnosis more than melancholia, have become a voice in the modern trauma conversation. People don't just read you. They lean on you. And what they find isn't answers, they find invitation. To listen. To rest. To reconnect. To feel the sacred in the breath, in the basil leaf, in the act of singing even when your throat is tight with grief. Because yes, the world is burning. It was burning in your time, too. Empires collapsing. Climate shifts. Corrupt leaders. Religious wars. Plagues. People shouting the end is near while stepping over the poor to do it. Sound familiar? You knew that despair. And you also knew that hope isn't a feeling, it's a practice. Something you stitch together in little, ordinary acts. Growing herbs, tending sick bodies, composing one more chant before sleep. You didn't write music to be performed in grand cathedrals. You wrote it for cloisters. For simple sisters with tired hands and open hearts. For dawns heavy with silence. For cold mornings when all you could do was sing to keep from freezing inside. And those songs, they last. When people hear your compositions now, they don't always know why they weep. There's no beat drop, no orchestral swell. Just a voice, floating like incense, suspended somewhere between ache and awe. The intervals are strange. The melody drifts upward like prayer or steam. And then it catches. It settles. And people feel held. Historians still argue whether your music broke compositional rules or created a system of its own. Whether you intended its hypnotic spiral structure, or simply followed what you heard in your visions. Honestly, you'd probably smile and say, I just sang what I saw. And that's what people still need today. Not perfection. Not doctrine. But sight. They need someone to tell them, yes, the world is cracked, but light pours through anyway. Yes, You are exhausted, but greenness will find you again. Yes, your heart is weird and aching and too full, but that's holy, too. You said it best, the fire has a voice, and it is not silent. Even now, as machines hum and notifications scream, people still strain to hear that ancient voice underneath. The one that says, you matter. You belong. You are stitched into something bigger than your inbox. And you, Hildegard, are that voice's echo. Sometimes, people light candles in your name. Other times, they just breathe deeper when your chant plays in the background. You're not always named. But you're there in the quiet urge to get back to the garden, to touch the soil, to believe the body can be holy again. You are not forgotten. You are needed. Because you remind us that life, even in chaos, is singable. That mystery isn't a problem to be solved, but a rhythm to join. That truth doesn't shout. It burns, glows, pulses. And if you close your eyes, if you breathe deep, if you listen hard, you can still hear her. That fierce, whispering nun. Still composing. Still seeing. Still singing. You don't get to choose your legacy. Not really. You can write, sing, preach, suffer, and hope, but the moment you die, the world begins rewriting you. Sanding down the sharp parts. Turning your thunder into a whisper. Your loud visions, they get archived. Your radical ideas, softened into sermons. Your grief, sanitized. But some voices outlast that. Yours does. You die on September 17th, 1179, in your abbey on the Rupertsberg. Not quietly, of course. The legend says that just before you pass, a beam of celestial light fills your room. Your sisters cry. The air is thick with chant and myrrh and mystery. Someone says it smells like oranges. You're 81. Ancient for your time. Tired. But still writing. Your final letter scolds a wayward archbishop. Your last chant is unfinished. There's no epic farewell, just a quiet slip into that other dimension you saw so clearly for decades. The veil lifts. You step through. And then the paperwork starts. Your followers immediately push for sainthood. They write glowing accounts of your life. Some even exaggerate a bit, adding in miracles, polishing your rough edges. They mean well. They want the world to know what you were. What you are. A force. A prophet. But bureaucracy stalls. Rome dithers. Twice, the canonization process begins and fizzles. Historians still argue whether politics, gender, or theological squabbles kept your name off the holy list. Centuries pass. And your voice. It lingers, soft but stubborn. Like lichen on stone. Your music is forgotten, then rediscovered by scholars in the 19th century. A few brave sopranos start to sing you again. At first, people think it's just quaint medieval nostalgia. But something clicks. There's heat under those notes. Fire. Women hear you and feel something wake up. Then comes the 20th century. Feminist theologians find you and light up. Here's a woman, bold, brilliant, unapologetic, who didn't just survive a man's world but bent it. You're reclaimed as a proto-eco activist. A female scientist before the word existed. A rebel cloaked in obedience. Conferences are held in your name. PhDs are written. Indie music albums sample your chants. You, who once dictated visions by candlelight, now appear in Spotify playlists and progressive seminary syllabi. And finally, in 2012, 833 years after your death, Pope Benedict XVI canonizes you. At last, you are Saint Hildegard. Not just revered. Official. But the Church doesn't stop there. That same year, you're named a Doctor of the Church, one of only 4 women to ever receive the title. You, the once sickly girl who wasn't allowed to speak, are now recognized as a teacher of the faith for all time. The irony is glorious. You're not just holy. You're an institution. But not the rigid kind. You're the wild thread that runs through the fabric, keeping it honest. The vision that won't be buried. The flame that sings. You become a saint not because you were perfect, but because you refused to be small. And now, here we are. At the end of your story, and yet not. Because your story has never really been about the Middle Ages. It's about what happens when someone listens so hard it rewires the world around them. When one quiet girl dares to say, "I see something," and keeps saying it louder and louder until the world either runs away or listens. You were told to be silent. You answered with symphonies. You were told to follow. You built monasteries. You were told to fear your visions. You wrote them in gold. And tonight, as someone lies in bed with this playing softly in the background, maybe just trying to sleep, maybe secretly trying to feel something again, you're still here. Still whispering. Still burning. Still green. Now, let the story settle. Let the flicker of candlelight fade behind your eyes, and let the sound of distant chant soften into silence. You've followed a life full of thunder and fire, of herb gardens and ink-stained parchment, of holy visions and earthy, aching humanity. And now it's night again. You might be feeling a little fuller, maybe a little sad, maybe just still. That's okay. Hildegard's world was never meant to leave you where it found you. Breathe deep. Feel the weight of the blankets around you, the rhythm of your breath in the hush. You don't have to make sense of every vision. You don't have to sing in perfect pitch. Just rest. Close your eyes and imagine a hillside covered in wild plants, wind in the trees, bells ringing somewhere just out of view. That's where she is. Still walking. Still singing. And if your mind drifts now, if your thoughts scatter into dreams, let them. Let them carry traces of her, a spark of courage, a strange color of light, a chant you can't quite hum but still remember in your bones. The world can wait. For now, drift down into that quiet place where greenness lives. Where the soul hums softly. Where Hildegard sings, and you just for a moment can hear her. Good night.